buddy. Have a go at that. You're sick. This guy is every bit of a meter. So stay tuned, guys, because you're going to see this lure and you're going to see a whole heap of methods coming up in this video. And believe me, it's not going to be one of them epic episodes, but let's bounce back to Josh of the past so he can give you the rundown on how to catch one of these. That is epic. So good. That's a lucky craft pointer. Oh man. Today, guys, we're not doing some spectacular fishing adventure. I'm not going to catch 20 fish in a session or anything like that. We're going to talk basics. We're going to go into some methods that I use for targeting threadfin salmon that I'm hoping that you guys can get a little bit of information out of and hopefully put to good use and catch some threadfin salmon of your own. So let's dive into it. Let's get into some of the details. So what am I talking about when I'm saying methods to catch threadfin salmon? Like, you just go out, you fish in the river. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that. Basically, I've got 3 methods that I'm going to talk about today with you guys and dive into a little bit in more depth what they are, what we're doing, what we're talking about. Basically, I want to try and improve your fishing. I want to make sure that you guys are actually catching some fish, because I'll tell you right now, it's not a super easy thing to do. Threadfin salmon aren't super easy to target, and they're not readily available to everyone as well. So obviously it can be region based, whether you're Rockhampton or whether you're down here in the south or even up and around the Mary River region and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that you guys can take a little bit from this, and I sort of had a bit of a reflection and thought, well, obviously I could make something that's nice and entertaining, or I could have a little bit of a chat to you guys about it and sort of impart a little bit of my knowledge and opinions onto you guys. I say opinions because this isn't all like cemented, it's not factual in the greatest of ways. So like, full disclaimer, guys, I'm not going to say do my course and you can catch 20% more fish. I'm not going to say anything silly like that. I just want you guys to sort of have a bit better of an understanding on these fish and how you can best target them. So that being said, let's dive into it. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Let's start with method number 1. So I'll see you in a hot minute. Alright guys, let's go through the first method off the rank. This one works really well if you've got next to no running gear, like electronics wise. If you've got no electric motor, if you've got no sound or no experience or anything like that, and you're just solely out for a fish and you just want to go out and go, look, I want to start trying to use lures, I want to start trying to catch threadies on lures, what can I do? Well, what I break it down into first is I'll be looking for mud flats, either on the outside of river bends or along the straight section of the river, and then coupling that with looking for activity. And when I say activity, what I mean is like birds working or birds in an area, because a bird in an area is going to give you a good indicator that there's bait fish there, and bait fish being there quite often means that this is going to be a larger predatory fish, whether it's bass, barramundi, threadfin salmon, depending on, you know, what you're targeting. So we've just picked out this little area here. It's along a straight section with a bit of a mud flat. I have sanded up fish in the past along this stretch of the river. We've got a bird off to the side working off one of the pontoons. We've got a good little bit of baits coming through on the side there as that water's dropping out. So also gonna run out tide. But this will work both run in, run out tide, doesn't matter too much. Obviously run out tide, you're going to be able to tell a lot better where your mud flats are because you've got less water, so you can sort of see, especially if you're not using your sounder. Like if you've just got a regular depth sounder, obviously you're going to be able to tell where the shallower stretches of the river are. But yeah, so let's quickly run through what we do, how I'd work it, and see what happens. This will work quite well for your vibes, soft plastics, and a lot of your heavier jigs and stuff like that. Even stick baits, that'll work quite well. And all we're doing is we're just flicking up current, or down current, sorry, where we are in the boat. Dog in the background, that's always convenient. We're just doing little hops, small hops along the bottom. The boat's keeping the current with us. This works quite well if you are in a high current spot, because quite often what can happen is you might spot lock up, you might be flicking your lure, and what happens is you'll end up just not being able to keep up with your lure. Your lure will drift way back, way quicker than what you can keep up with. So as that lure starts to drift back, just throw it out again. Throw it down current of where we're throwing, or where we're drifting into. Let it sink to the bottom. Just little tiny hops, just along the bottom there as you go through. Nothing special to it. And what that's doing is imitating a natural bait fish as it's coming downstream with your tide. The tide's going out, your bait fish are getting pushed out of the smaller creeks, smaller drains and stuff like that. And what they're doing is they're just drifting downstream. And the threadies, what'll happen is if they're actually anchored up, if they're sitting in a location and they're actively feeding on stuff that comes past, you're basically just bringing the bait to them and creating that natural ambush that they would normally be using or normally do. So this one has quite a slow sink, but this is a Nomad Vertrex vibe, max vibe, sorry I should say. You could use a Xeric fish trap, you could use a kamikaze stick bait. You could actually use quite a fair few different stick baits. A good sinking stick bait can imitate similar action to what your vibes can. So that was a I think there's a bit of stick or something on the bottom there. But this works well if you've got a lot of fish spread out as well. So you find that if you've also got an area where there's a lot of fish, they're quite spread out, they're not necessarily just sitting in one location, this method can work quite well as well. Just call back up to this lure, throw it back out again. So we've got a few fish coming through on the sounder there as it is at the moment. But once again, if you don't have a sounder, that's not the end of the world. You can still do this method. We know that there's fish in the area. Obviously, because I have a sounder, I know that there's fish in the area. But if you've done a little bit of looking visually and you found an area where you can see a bit of bait activity along the edge of the bank, you can see bird life, birds feeding on those bait fish, you're in with a pretty good chance. Because quite often, those threadies will actually be where the bait schools are as well. Depending on what the bait is too, might change up your imitation. If there's a lot of prawn activity, you might go for some more of a prawn imitation, like a Chase Baits Armour prawn or a Hulk Production swim prawn on a heavy jig head. Alright guys, basically that's it. That's that simple method. So that can be used pretty much any time. Like if you don't have the sounder, you don't have all of that fancy gear like I have, not that it's fancy anymore, it's a little bit outdated. That's besides the point. That's a method that you can use no matter what. So let's move on. Next method. Alright guys, time for method number 2. Very similar to method number 1, we're going to be using vibes and a lot of heavier lures. There's not a great deal of options with these. Obviously you can't get some of your, your lighter plastics or sticks. You can't get a lot of your lighter soft plastics and your hard bodies and stuff like that down to some of the depths at which these threadies can sit at. So like option 1, very similar, we're going to have to use vibes, jigs, stick baits, stuff like that. Not a whole lot of options, obviously versatility wise, but still it's a good method. And basically we're going to imagine that we've found a school of fish on the sounder. It's been a trying day, I'll put it that way. It's been a trying day. Don't you patronise me at home, alright? Yeah, so we're going to pretend that we found a school of fish. So with this technique, you're sitting over the top of a school of fish, or you've got a school of fish out to the side from you. All you're going to be doing is you're going to be flicking your hard body. All you're going to do is you're just going to flick your vibe upstream of where they are. So let's imagine that they're just outside of the boat. We're going to flick our vibe upstream Allow that to sink down to the bottom. Once it reaches the bottom, we're just going to give it those little hops. Same as what we were doing before. Little hops along the bottom, imitating a bait fish as it comes downstream. Now this works great if you've got holding threadies. If they're not cruising, if they're not grazing and they're not really spaced out, it's actually quite a good method. You can get it right down in front of their faces. Same thing, just wind in once it's drifted back past the boat, flick it back out upstream. Very simple, very easy method to do. If you've got a good sounder, if you've got an electric motor and you can position yourself to find the fish to start with, that's always the biggest part, is finding them, because sometimes that can be quite tricky. But once you do find them, you can sit on them, you can target them this way, and you'll probably find a fair bit of success with them, because when they are sitting in a location like that and they can't move or they can't really do too much, sorry, if they can't move, if they're not moving too much and they're just sitting there, they're not foraging, they're just milling around in one area, they're trying to hide out of the current, you can actually target them a lot easier. And what happens is you'll get more of a reaction bite, so you don't necessarily have to have something that they're feeding on. For example, they might be feeding on bait fish that are a bit bigger than this, they're more like bony brim, and you're flicking, say, a soft prawn imitation, they're probably still going to eat it. Because they're opportunistic fish, they're not going to pass up a free meal that floats past their face. So it's quite practical that they're going to, eat just about anything. All right. So yeah, that's the section. That's the second method done and dusted. And I think it's time we move on to my personal favourite. Biased, I'm very biased. I like it. You'll like it once you get into it. You really like it. Trust me, it is fun. So without further ado, last method coming up right now. This is by far my favourite and probably the easiest one to do, I get? No, I won't say it's the easiest. It was by far my favourite just because of what can happen, what goes on. Like, let me just sort of give you an idea of what we're talking about. We're fishing a drain, a creek drain, drains, gutters, whatever you want to call them, creeks, and we've got this lovely amount of like water and mud spewing out of it and a huge back eddy behind it. Now, not all creeks and drains are going to be this fruitful, but this one's normally pretty productive, and the fishing can be insane in these drains at times. Now, we do have a couple of fish moving through on sounder, so they'd be periodically feeding up inside this, or up in the mouth of this creek, but it is a great point of focus if you don't know where there's a school of fish, if you can't find a school of fish, if you can't find fish feeding. Run out tide, close to the bottom of the last couple of hours of run out, you're always going to get some sort of action. I won't say always, just comes out naturally. You're not always going to get some sort of action, but you're in with a good chance here because there's so many different things that add up to a scenario which creates a natural circumstance for a threadfin salmon to be feeding. This is normally what they're doing. They're coming up, they're feeding in the shallows, they're aggregating around these drains where there's bait fish coming to them from the creeks and they can't get back out. And it's one of those things that it just adds up to such a culmination of events where you can... I'm going on about, it's like I'm describing a food. The taste is impeccable, but yeah, I digress. Let's try and get into it. Let me give you a quick show of what we're going to be using. So I've got you on the other camera just because it is a little bit windy here. So your options are endless. So this is one of my favourites. This is a little Holty rigged up on an EWP hook or a weedless hook, wide gape hook, whatever you want to call it. These are very deadly in that shallow water. They create the perfect sort of fleeing bait prawn. And I would probably run a little bit of a jig head here, but there's a fair bit of current. Probably more towards the bottom of the tide. You would look at, you know, using something else. My favourite, best option, I would say, for this sort of stuff is one of these. Now, this is a jerkbait. Obviously, if you don't know what it is, this is a jerkbait. This is a Lucky Craft Pointer XDRT. So that XDRT means it's an extra deep diver, and it's got a rattle built into it. So I know that's good action, but all that's going to do for us is that rattle is just going to make the fish go berserk. They hone in on it. If they're in that murky, dirty water, which they are, the colour doesn't matter too much. You could go any sort of palette. You could go crazy wild colours. You could go something neutral. It doesn't matter. The rattle and the action that this lure imparts and its ability to sit there and suspend allows them fish to find it in that horrible, murky sort of water conditions. Now, obviously, you've also got your other options of using vibes and stick baits and stuff like that. They work well, but I don't find a lot of fun in using a vibe. I like throwing my lures and imparting a little bit of action. But let me also appeal to you, there are hard bodies out there that you can use, but you don't have to do a damn thing. This being one of them, you can literally, this being one of them. This is a Xeric Pyra. If you're new to the channel, if you haven't seen me use this before, this lure absolutely slays threadfin salmon, especially in those shallow water conditions. It's a little shallow lipped, bibbed lure, whatever you want to call it. I'm no expert. It's a floating surface / subsurface lure. It dives to about 1 meter. It has a really good wobble and creates a lot of vibration in that water. Now, in these shallower conditions, this thing, you can just whip it out, straight wind. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to impart any action or anything like that. You can literally just let the lure do all the work. And late at night, I love it. You can just flick it out. You don't have to do anything. You just get creamed every time. So let's get into it. Let me show you how I break this down. We'll get the drone up and sort of give you a little bit of a look, and we'll go from there, eh? Now, the action on this is basically just a jerk, pause, jerk, pause. You can do as many twitches, pauses as you want. Now, we're in quite fairly heavy current, so we're only going to be working that first little bit of the water column, or first little edge of the bank there. But we're just working the edge of that dirty water line, right where all of that bait's going to be getting punished as it comes out of the creek, straight into the mouths of these fish that are feeding. Now, well, this sort of area is one of those sort of circumstances where you can sit here, you can post up and fish with bait, you could use lures the whole time, you could sit here and use both. It doesn't really matter too much. But it gives you a lot of flexibility in what you want to use. Like, you don't have to sit here and flick lures all day at it. Try and pan down a little bit. It's just that quick little jerk and a little pause here and there. Don't have to pause it too often because there's not really a lot of time to pause it. So you sort of, it's just a fairly repetitive jerk to it. But oh man, this is fire. This is what I absolutely love, because you've just got such a shallow water circumstance. The fish that are in here are just going to be absolutely cracking anything that comes past. Right guys, there you have it. That's 3 different methods that I use, or you can use, for targeting threadfin salmon. Obviously, I don't want to give spots away or spoon feed you too much or anything like that. Like, I'm happy to help anyone out there that has a desire to catch them. And I'm not going to lie to you and say, like, it's easy as to catch these fish. You are going to have to put a bit of time into it. I've put a lot of time into it myself to have caught the fish that I have. I've spent a lot of time on the water to experience some of the fishing sessions that I've had. Like, it's not something that comes you know, naturally. If you're a naturally good fisherman, maybe, but you've got to work at it. And it's one thing to tell you guys how to go about or how to target these fish, but at the end of the day, it's how much time you're willing to put into them and how much time you want to spend on the water. If you just want to go out and you just want to catch a fish, definitely, by all means, use live bait. Sit out there for hours and hours on end. I'm not going to lie to you and say that lure fishing's any different. You are going to have to spend a lot of time on the water, and you are going to have to put in the hours to, you know, the miles to get the smiles, as they say. So definitely, it's not for the faint of heart. Like, you know, like I'll tell you right now, myself included, it's taken me hundreds upon hundreds of hours, even thousands of hours for me to catch or have caught the amount of fish I have. I have a lot of sessions where I don't catch anything. Like today, for example, I didn't catch anything today. That's not that I didn't find the fish, it's not that they weren't biting, it's just some days you're a shit fisherman. Long story short, some days you just suck. So remember guys, if you've enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. It helps me know that you guys are enjoying this content. If I've missed anything, please leave a comment below. Let me know if you're still looking for a little bit more information I haven't covered it in this episode. Try and give me a little bit more of a question or a scenario or something like that, and I'll try and answer it as best I can. Or if you want me to do another video on something a little bit more in depth, I can do that as well. So that is the end of the video, and yeah, thank you guys. If you have reached this point in the video, good on you. I love you and I appreciate you. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Just an epic fish. Such an epic fish.